just can't escape from the past. Never go chasing the dawn. Why don't you just release me and go your separate way?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Halsey Live. We have a very special guest today, Mr. James Lindsay, Twitter phenomenon and intellectual master of the woke right. James, how you doing today, man?
I'm pretty good, thank you. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Before we get started, let everyone know where they can find you and follow you.
I am at newdiscourses.com on the one hand, if you want to see all of my writing, my podcasts, etc. And I am at Conceptual James on all social medias except for Facebook. I am not on Facebook.
Good. Smart.
Well, no, I got kicked off.
Did you really?
Yeah, permanently kicked off Facebook for a joke about the MAID program in Canada that I made some years ago. So the medical assistance in dying. I made this meme card. I know it's a little bit like Gen X, but it was that old comedian, the Russian comedian Yakov Smirnoff. And so I made a meme card that said, "In socialist," it was his face, and it says, "In socialist Canada, suicide hotline calls you," and permaban from Facebook for life for that.
That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. As always, family, you can find me at halseyenglish.live, and that has all my links. You can find me on Twitter at realhalseye. I got my Patreon, I got my Substack. You can find my writing, my posting, my podcasts on YouTube, and all over the place. I want to jump right into it because yesterday we had a 3-hour space on this. We had 4 different continents represented. We had all across the U.S., and we said, what is the woke right? And there was no consensus. And I figured you're the one who coined the term, and you're the one who really is the master of this. So let's get right into it. What is the woke right? How would you?
Well,
define
I might be the master of it, but I didn't coin the term. This is an urban legend, actually, that I get credit for something I didn't do. So this term, just to kind of like point it out, this term at least goes back to, I'm looking at the date, I'm on this thing right now, December of 2022, there was a book review of Stephen Wolfe's book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. It was written by a pastor named Kevin DeYoung. And the title of his review is The Rise of Right-Wing Wokeism. And so he reviews this Christian nationalist book that it's straight up theocratic in its orientation. And he explains, it's a 20-something page, it's a very thorough 20-something page review of his book. And he, along with another guy who had written about this in the same context, his name's Neil Shenvi, another Christian, had written a review of this book earlier in the year and laid out, which the book came out in 2022, laid out the case that what Stephen Wolfe was presenting was just another form of woke, but appearing on the right. So it was talking about identity politics. It was talking about the idea of a sense of alienation and, this notion that there is an oppressor system of power, not an oppressor like a tyrant king, but a system of power that is designed specifically to exclude people like them from political discourse and from the center. So there's some marginalizing force. So there's a million ways we could define this, and people say, James, you won't ever settle on like one definition of woke and woke right, and so it's confusing for people. But this is because woke is a broad phenomenon. It has a very simple definition. It means having adopted Marxist style analysis or critical theory to explain the world. But then you have to unpack that. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you believe there's a system of power, or there's some all-powerful or mostly powerful they out there, some group of people who have a power, you could call them a ruling class, who have the power to set the terms upon which society interacts. And once they do that, they work to exclude political rivals for political reasons. So they'll say there are certain things you can and cannot say. There are certain things that are deemed true and false, valid and invalid. inbounds and out of bounds in terms of ethics or morals. So maybe it's true to say this uncomfortable thing about this particular race, but we don't for polite reasons, right? Or whatever else. So they set the boundaries of discourse such that they stay in power and they marginalize their political rivals. So this is the essence of how that thinking works. It's the class-based conflict model that Karl Marx put out, which is why it's adopting Marxist thinking. It's not trying to offer necessarily a clear alternative vision for society, but rather to engage in a criticism of the existing society to destabilize its power structure so that that can be replaced by other people. Now, it turns out that that set of behaviors can be engaged by anybody. You could do this for Islam and you get something called Islamism. You can do this for leftism and you get something that looks like communism. You can do this for like this kind of third world immigration model that you see with the post-colonial story, and you get third worldism, as it's sometimes called, or post-colonial theory. You can do this with race and you get critical race theory. You can do this with normalcy and sexuality and you get queer theory. You can also do this with the idea that there was a pure German folk that was actually racially bound as a nation that could have been very successful had it not been contaminated by racial contaminants like racial minorities and especially Jews, and you get Nazism. So this model of thinking is what I call woke. And it generates the class-based identity, which makes the identity politics, which takes a victimhood orientation, which does all of the things. It adopts a Machiavellian framework where they're justified because of their oppression using dishonest and bullying tactics. So all the stuff like cancel culture, lying to advance their causes, hiding their true intentions, all of that are subsidiary to this. But at the very heart of this is a way of thinking. And this is what I really have been, I just looked it up. It is in my book, Cynical Theories, that I published in 2020, that I submitted to the publisher in final form in 2019. And I looked back through my old files and found out that we actually wrote this section in the middle of 2018. So by 2018, my co-author in Cynical Theories and I had written this argument for what we were calling it postmodernism, the postmodern political principle, for example. And let me actually just tell you what it says, because this is what we wrote back then. I got a copy of the book real quick. It was on the page and it moved. So let me pull it up.
So I've been saying this about immigration. I've been saying, for lack of a better term, I call it the noble savage theory, is that because a lack of progress can only be defined by oppression, it doesn't matter what group is violent, what group is terrible, what group is incapable of advancing Western society. They have to be equal to everyone else, and the only reason that they haven't advanced is because of oppression. So,
that's right.
So the Jews are always the bad guy when it comes to Israel, because their societies that have invaded them have always been less successful. So therefore it can only be because of oppression. Whereas the Israelis can't be oppressed because they're successful.
So here's what we wrote in 2018.
Perfect.
Postmodern thinkers, and we were focusing on postmodernism in this book. Postmodern thinkers approach the rejection of modernism and Enlightenment thought, especially with regard to universal truths, objective knowledge, and individuality, in strikingly different ways. But we can spot a few consistent themes. The postmodern turn, which we could call the woke turn, involves two inextricably linked core principles, one regarding knowledge and one regarding politics, which act as the foundation for four significant themes. These principles are the postmodern knowledge principle, which is radical skepticism about whether objective knowledge or truth is obtainable, and a commitment to cultural constructivism, and the postmodern political principle, which is a belief that society is formed of systems of power and hierarchies which decide what can be known and how. This generates four major themes, and the four major themes of postmodernism are: 1, the blurring of boundaries; 2, the power of language; 3, cultural relativism; and 4, the loss of the individual and the universal, which generates the identity politics. So we wrote that 7 years ago. This is a completely consistent, because I bring that up because people accuse me all the time of changing the definition of woke. Woke means whatever the left is doing today, apparently. And that's not what it means. It means thinking about the world this way, that there are people who have power. They decide what we're allowed to think and talk about, how we're allowed to think and talk about it. And therefore, if something falls outside of that range, it's probably something that's being suppressed, which means it's not just true, but it's a courageous, stunning and brave truth that has to be prioritized. So when you see people saying, well, we're just asking questions, or you're not allowed to talk about that, as if that verifies what they're saying, they're engaging in that woke thinking. Marginalized knowledge is preferred to established knowledge, is the woke way of thinking. And that means that there's a marginalizer, and that means that the marginalization is occurring according to politically identifiable groups, whether that's identity categories like race and sexuality, religion, whether that, on the other hand, is nationality, which is kind of the way that the right wing thinks about it, more in terms of nationality rather than, immutable identity. Although, there's right-wing identity politics too. There's white victimhood culture, there's white supremacy, white nationalism. Those are all things. There's actually this kind of like pro-patriarchal masculine weird thing that went on that starts by touching truths that you're not supposed to talk about because they're impolitic, but then goes off the rails and says properly crazy things like Nick Fuentes famously, gets played all the time, that women need to shut the F up. Like, the helpmate and counselor that's described in the Bible is not shutting the F up. So there's like so woke right, it's what your question was. There is a way of thinking about the world, that there's a power structure that keeps my political favored people out of power. It's illegitimate, it's artificial, it's completely relative, and therefore we're justified in behaving badly in order to take back the power for people like us. And we'll do that by favoring that which is not supposed to be talked about, which can include true, or, you're not supposed to promote false things, right? 2 + 2 = 5 is just false. So there were reasons other than political power, then somebody would say, no, don't say 2 + 2 = 5. That's just wrong, right? Well, they, in a totally woke worldview, they would actually subsume that and say, well, there are other ways you could think about adding 2 and 2. 2 and 2 could represent other things. And actually, sometimes 2 + 2 might equal 5. And they still it's the people that control mathematics who don't want us to talk about that. And you can hear almost like the Tucker Carlson vibe. Well, there's just people out there that they just don't want us to talk about these things. And these are just valid questions. I'm just asking valid questions. What's the problem with asking questions? This is America. It's a free country. So now I'm appealing to a value to get you to override your logical thinking processes. I'm trying to get you emotionally engaged. This is woke. And it doesn't matter if you're woke on the left, on the right. If you're neither left or right, like with Islam, is neither left or right intrinsically. It's something else. It's a religious orientation or a political doctrine with a religion attached to it orientation, but it's neither intrinsically left nor right. It's something else, but they're still woke.
Wouldn't you consider Trumpism to be a form of that to an extent? And I love Trump, don't get me wrong. But it's constantly defined, because even though he's constantly defining that system of oppression, the deep state, the swamp, all of these things, I mean, even though they're true, he's still defining an oppressor that he's fighting against consistently that can't be really verified when he shows what he's fighting against.
Well, that one right there was the qualifier. If it's a shadowy, vague system that can't actually be verified, that's pervasive, etc., then yeah, a little bit, or maybe even a lot, depending on how it gets presented. If he's pushing is he pushing for a belief in facts or in outsider knowledge because it's outsider, right? That's woke. Facts are not woke. If, however, the thing can be verified, genuinely verified and supported, it's probably not woke. You're just talking about inconvenient facts for a power structure. Genuine oppression does exist, but believing that the world is constituted as oppression basically to exclude you probably is more along the lines of woke. And so I have seen definitely some dipping into that within the kind of broader Trump universe and the MAGA universe. And what that's led to is this moment where we are now, where normally the kind of stuff that the woke right, as I've been calling them and other people have called them, wouldn't have a lot of traction among American conservatives. This idea of a deep skepticism toward the Constitution, I don't think would have tracked with American conservatives even a few years ago. But now we're in this post-COVID, post-identity politics, weird situation, post-Biden administration, oh, for God's sake, situation where it's like, how do we know that we can trust our institutions? How do we know that there's not a coordinated effort? And so that makes it very easy for people who are playing this, I'm just asking questions, what's outside of the pale, that must have some credibility. We should talk about that. The things they don't want us to talk about are the things more valid. That's sticky because of whether Trump is pointing to things that are totally true, partially true, or not true at all. That has become a major vibe. I think he's pointing to things that are mostly true in most cases. But, it's not exactly like the evidence is always forthcoming. Sometimes it takes months or years. Look at the Russia scandal thing, right? The evidence has only actually started to come out now properly that this was a coordinated effort involving Russian activity with Democrats to take Trump down and then project Russia onto him. It took 8 years for the evidence to surface, but the evidence did surface that this was actually a coordinated plot. So it's not whether or not there's oppression. There can be oppression in the world. It's not whether or not there's a conspiracy. There can be conspiracies. It's whether or not there's this all-pervasive, vague, shadowy system that splits the population into a power group and an alienated group, and that the alienated group becomes identified with its sense of alienation and actually ultimately takes on a collectivist consciousness. It's kind of intrinsic to what Marx called class consciousness, what feminists call feminist consciousness, what the critical race theorists call critical race consciousness or just race consciousness. So that collective consciousness that we are alienated by the oppressive force, the system of power. Therefore, we have something in common that binds us together. We come to identify ourselves that way, whether it's race. Like this is a very close, easy touch point. A lot of people have looked at the argument that critical race theory has made. Critical race theory says that intrinsically people are lying to themselves when they say that race consciousness doesn't matter. People should be race conscious. And then they say there's a correct polarity to how that's supposed to work, anti-racism as they define it. Well, you can say, you know what, they're right. We should be more race conscious. Race consciousness does matter. Race tribalism is the right way. However, rather than being anti-racist on their terms, we're going to actually be properly racist. That's not only is it completely possible, it is completely consistent with the dichotomy that critical race theory presents. And what we see is a lot of this. They say, critical race theory is a war on white people. Therefore, white people need to have white racial consciousness. They need to bind together as a collective to assert their political power. And if we don't, we're going to be outcompeted by people who do. Therefore, we have to do this. So therefore, they take on a white racial consciousness. In other words, they, as Karl Marx phrased it, they retract their sense of alienation into themselves and supersede themselves into the class. This is woke. I know this is all complicated, but this is what it means.
You see, for me, it's not complicated because I've been working in Jewish issues for a long time. And I've said long before COVID, I always said the JQ is a pathway to madness. It's like grabbing the third rail of the subway. Whether you're pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro-Jewish, anti-Jewish, it's like grabbing the power vein with both hands and just holding on as it fries your brain. Because it's so rooted in bullshit that it forces you to go into the segments of society that you wouldn't normally enter. And you become obsessed with it. And then it melts your brain to the point where you only see things through these lenses. And COVID brought this mainstream. COVID made this part of the consciousness that if you disagree with those in power, you have something valuable to say, because power is obviously so corrupt and lying so often that just being against power means that you're in some way valid, right? I just saw a hilarious meme and it said Tim Pool, James Lindsay, and I forgot the third one. And it was that standing around the table, and it says they were all pointing to Candace Owens as a stupid
It's
cunt.
Nick Fuentes, actually. It's really funny.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's Nick Fuentes, and I was like, well, at least I'm the big guy.
That's true. I didn't think of that.
But no, we're all pointing at Candace because Candace is just like throwing out like I don't know what Tim and Nick are doing with this issue. They're not exactly consistent, but
I think
it's
Candace is
like
doing it honestly.
What
Someone
Candace
was
is doing is consistent. She's consistently nuts. She is
Yeah, but
saying,
someone's
and it's
explained
not.
this to me, and I think I'm falling for it a bit. She's being sued by the Macrones, right? And in order
Uh-huh.
to be found guilty of defamation, you have to show either willful disregard for the truth, or that you believed it was true at the time and couldn't differentiate between the two. So she's
Yeah.
trying to say the most crazy shit she can to show that she says anything that's crazy and believes it. So that
Well, I
she,
mean,
I
that's a
think that's why
totally
she's doing
plausible
it.
thing. Well,
Hmm.
there's other pretty good arguments that I've seen from people that she's masterfully deploying cult engagement tactics as well, where you have like this big promise of the big reveal that's coming right around the corner, and there's this huge emotionally engaging thing, and I've seen stuff. I know it's true. I don't know, no, but I know it's true. We feel that it's true, and the reveal is coming. The receipts are there. I'm going to bring them out on my live stream behind the paywall in 6 days, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like one big promise after another that then for some goofy excuse either gets derailed or never manifests. But what you're doing is it's like I was just down in Florida and I was out watching. I was literally, it's kind of dorky, but I was in a hotel by the airport. So I'm watching planes land. So I got out on the pier. It's in Florida. There's water. And so I'm watching planes land on the runway, like the landing, the run, because it's kind of cool to watch planes
It
like
is.
that close.
I
And
live
so
by
I'm
an
out there
airport. I know
watching planes,
exactly what
taking
you're talking
pictures of
about.
jets as they come into land at Palm Beach Airport. And these guys roll up in a boat and they start fishing like underneath the dock, and they're catching these fish. And it's kind of cool. And I'm talking to them, but it's like I'm watching how they're taking the minnow that they've got wiggling on the hook, and they're like tugging it, and they're getting the fish's attention. That's what she's doing.
Hmm.
It's like fishing. It's like she's keeping people on the line, on the hook. And then every time there's like some new big allegation, it's like when you jerk the rod and you set the hook a little deeper. And so she's keeping people in that. Meanwhile, she's saying such insane stuff that people clip the hell out of it, share the hell out of it, and then people are like, what in the world's going on over there? Like a train wreck. So they look, and some proportion, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 8%, maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 50%. I think it's probably something in the 5 to 10% range, are caught up in the drama and they're on the hook. And then she just reels them in, and she just reels them in again, throws the line out, reels them in again. But it's the cult dynamic techniques that she's using to isolate people from the mainstream. Imagine what you have to like like coming out and being like Charlie Kirk's wife helped murder him or whatever. Like, imagine where you are in your life when you decide that you espouse that that's possibly true or likely true, and then you're trying to talk to other people. This is a very isolating situation. So now, there's the group that believes it and supports you and backs you up when you get online. There's Candace who's saying, you guys are the brave truth tellers with me. You understand. And then you've got your friends that are looking at you like you're abhorrent. It's very clear, like, again, it doesn't work on everybody, but it sucks a certain percentage of people in and it locks them in. These are cult tactics. But yeah, she might also just be trying to deflect from this lawsuit that appears to be likely to devastate her.
So credit to Tree of Logic, because she told me this in 2019, and she's been consistently right about this with Candace Owens. She always told me to watch Candace Owens because she has a pattern, right? When she sees that things are not about to go her way, she starts a fight with a group that's oppressing her so she can claim that what's not going her way is because of them as opposed to her own incompetence. Right? We saw
Mm-hmm.
it with BLM and we saw all that, but the most glaring case was with Kanye. When Kanye, I don't know if you know this, he claims that it's because he started talking stuff about Hitler and Jews that he lost his bank account. He lost all of this. He lost his bank account a month before he said a word about Jews on publicly. What he
Mm-hmm.
did was he marched into Chase Manhattan Bank and demanded to see Jamie Dimon, which presidents don't walk into Chase Manhattan Bank and demand to see Jamie Dimon. And he told him he was going to take all of his assets out of Chase Manhattan unless Jamie Dimon gave him a $4 billion investment fund that he would have complete control over. So the next day, of course, they sent him a letter saying, thanks for your business, but you're no longer welcome here. You have a month to get your assets out of Chase Manhattan Bank. And immediately after, he met with Candace, and then he started talking about Hitler and Jews and all this. And then Candace released the letter of him losing his bank account, but she edited out the date on it. so that you wouldn't see that this happened long before he said a word about Jews or Hitler. And she also was coming up for contract negotiations with the Daily Wire. So she was about to do the same exact thing. Right. And the both of them went off the deep end about Jews and Israel and all of this stuff that they had never really gotten so into. And it completely deflected from their own incompetence, from the things they screwed up themselves. And Candace has consistently done that.
Yeah, it's the other people that play this game too. I mean, this is like where Elijah Schaffer got at the Blaze, got very strongly, credibly accused of sexual harassment and sexual assault against Sarah Gonzalez and Sydney Watson. And the next thing you know, he's on Twitter at the same time, suddenly calling Glenn Beck a demon for his religious beliefs publicly. So now when he gets canned from the Blaze, it looks like it's because he picked this fight with Glenn Beck, when in fact he had some serious legal issues happening behind the scenes, and he's pulled this massive deflection stunt. And you know that sort of behavior is repeated there as well. So yeah, I don't know the details of any of this, so I can't like corroborate it, but sure, that sounds completely plausible to me.
So Glenn Beck is someone I just feel truly bad for. The guy has built a media empire, and he's one of the more honest people out there. And he keeps like doing posts and interviews where he's just like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Like I'm looking at what's going on around me and I can't figure it out. Like he's that good of a person that he doesn't want to believe that what's going on is real. And you can see it's crushing him, you know?
Yeah. I just saw him the other day in person, and it's clearly stressing him out. It's definitely an issue. And it's hard. I mean, I'm pretty tapped into what's going on, and I've been calling some of this stuff years, actually, a lot of it months, and some of it just weeks, but a lot of it years in advance, with, you know, not perfect, but decent accuracy, because the patterns are what they are, and you can kind of tell who must be doing things if once you kind of have the model and they act in a certain way, they fit into the model, and it's like how the thinking works, and so you can make these guesses and these predictions. And yet at this point, they've gone like such, I don't know another word for it, but chaos agent. They've gone like such chaos agent that it's hard for even me to grasp what's going on. Like you've got, you know, Milo coming out one day on Tucker Carlson saying nobody's gay, and 2 days later appearing on Tim Pool saying Charlie Kirk was gay, which is certainly not true. And then you've got, you know, Tim Pool's on his rant about Candace now, but like a month and a half or a month ago, he's talking about how she's going to be the next president. She's the voice of a generation. It's like they're just everywhere contradicting each other. It looks like Milo has just been like lifted up with a crane out of whatever pit he was in, given like a Tommy gun, and is just spinning around shooting at anybody, friend and enemy. And just, I don't know that it looks quite like he's having the time of his life doing it. He kind of can't even straighten his eyes out, but he appears to just be shooting wildly, and they're all attacking each other, but they're all attacking common enemies. Like, it's very disorienting for people. And I kind of can commiserate with Glenn, because even for people like me who have been pretty on this ahead of time, it's very hard to get a grip on, okay, maybe this is a phase in the plan. Maybe something slipped and they're trying to, like, chaos is the last card they have to play before another chapter. Maybe the chaos is just the transition to another chapter, but it's very difficult to guess what in the world is going on all of a sudden.
So I think with Tim Pool, and I have a theory on this, and I'm trying to get an interview with them because they're right by my house. They work at a Rutgers University. But I think people like Tim Pool, who he worked his way up. Like this guy, he did hours of broadcasting every day for years. Ever since the Wall Street thing, since Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah,
like
Occupy.
He built his audience organically. Same thing with Ben Shapiro. But when you have people that are just coming out with these audiences, you think to yourself, well, they must be working really hard to build these audiences. Then you enter the Network Contagion Research Institute. And they have been doing some amazing work. They get some shit because they took some money from Soros about 7 years ago. And they have some left-wing partners, some right-wing partners, but that
was their idea. I know those guys. They took one grant from Soros and one from Koch at the same time, thinking it would show that they're nonpartisan because they had one of. But all that happens is they get attacked from each side as having taken money from the other side, and it's just been this massive problem. They took one grant in each case from each side, and they've tried to do that, partner across the spectrum, thinking it would make them appear unbiased, but all that happens is that people selectively pick the thing they're aligned with and say that makes them biased.
But they're
But they
doing
do amazing
work. Like
amazing work.
I've been giving their stuff to people for months, and it's so technical. I feel bad because if you don't just read the introduction and the conclusion, you can really get lost if you don't understand what it's talking about. But you can just read the introduction and conclusion and get the point. But I think that people like Tim Pool, when they see stuff like this, they realize, like, wait a minute, Candace isn't building an organic audience. Candace is botting herself an audience, and so is Nick Fuentes, and so are all of these big influencers that aren't putting in the work that Tim Pool does. That's why I think he's so angry about it. Like when he talks about it, he gets downright pissed because he put in the work.
He did put in the work.
Yeah,
I 100% think that Tim grew his audience organically, and with a ton of hard work, and like you said, hours and hours of broadcasts a day, to the point where I'm not quite sure who listens, but it's a lot of content that he spent a lot of years producing. And he really, I mean, he's been very focused on it. I watched him when he was kind of I wasn't just watching, I was like friends with him at the time, watching it up close and personal in some cases. Him, he had that, like, everybody has the kind of like chase the leader mentality in the F1 race. And there's Rogan just speeding down the track, and Tim's like just tracking, like, how's he cutting the curves? That's what I'm going to do. How's he doing? That's what I'm going to do. And so he's like, okay, Rogan has like his cool drinks. He's like, Tim doesn't even drink. So he buys like some bar, puts it in the studio and all this so that he can kind of have a little more of that Rogan vibe with his guests. And like, he's kind of like I said, he's tacking on Rogan the same way that Charlie Kirk for a long time was tacking off Tucker Carlson, to the point where Charlie Kirk's voice inflections started to sound like Tucker for about a year. And then he kind of like found his own maturity. I mean, he's 28 or something, so whatever, but he found his own maturity after he you could see him tacking off of Tucker. And so, like, this is a thing that successful up and comers that are actually putting in the work do to build their brands, to catch up, to do what it is that they're after, who aren't just like total mavericks just carve their own path through the jungle. But a lot of people build like this, and Tim worked his ass off to build what he had. And then you do at some point realize, like, oh crap, like a ton of like the influencer universe is just this totally artificial object that has just been built out of thin air, sometimes extremely quickly, and possibly at times for nefarious purposes, or just to have, a useful actor type puppet voice as the voice of the people or whatever. And it's angering.
Well, with Tim also, I think one of his niches is that he doesn't have a strict focus. Like I have two strict focus. I focus on American politics, and I focus on the geopolitics of the Middle East and Europe. Right? And if you ask me about that, I could talk for hours and hours and hours. But he doesn't have that type of focus. So he wants to learn from his guests. Like, that's why he doesn't seem to give softball interviews. It's because when he brings people in, he's like, I want to understand where you're coming from. So let's talk about whatever it is. I don't care if it pisses people off. I want to know where you're coming from and what you're saying. But then when they bullshit him, he gets pissed. He like you said, like you'll see him just snap and be like, no, that's not what you said. That's not what you're doing. That's not how you're doing this. Like, why are you making this up now? Are you trying to just sound good to my audience, or are you trying to do this or that? And it's quite impressive the way that he works. Understanding what you know and don't know is such an important part of being an honest broker when you're discussing really controversial issues. And he doesn't pretend to know things that he doesn't know. I actually give him a lot of credit for it, because I don't watch the show that often. It kind of pisses me off. A lot of the guests I'm not interested in.
Yeah, so, same here.
But I give him credit for at least having. I mean, the guy's been swatted like 10 times. He says he recently tried to shoot up his house where his wife and his kids, or his girlfriend and his kids are. Like,
his wife, I think. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really think they got married. I think they've been together forever though. So, yeah. But as I've been following you for quite a while. My friend Noam, I think you know Noam too. He's been pointing me out. We did a couple spaces where we played your analysis of Mein Kampf, and literally mind-blowing stuff, because the perception that people have of Hitler in the world is so different from what Hitler actually was, no matter which side you're coming from, right? Like, he's the evil monster, he's the helpless villain. your perception of him is probably not based on what is actually true. It's based on whatever media portfolio you happen to follow about the guy. And you're the way you broke down Mein Kampf was so different that we had like a few hundred people in the space, and everybody was just, I've never seen everybody so quiet, where everybody just wanted to listen to this breakdown. And what brought you to that? Like, what brought you to want to look into that?
So it's really interesting the way things work. I read Mein Kampf a number of years ago, and I don't claim that I actually, now that I've looked back at it properly many times, I don't claim that I actually understood what I read, but at least I had like a basis for knowing what the guy had said. And mea culpa, it's 2 volumes. Between the 2 volumes is like 500 pages. I read volume 1 and I did not read volume 2. I was like, this is enough for right now. So I knew there was a volume 2. I'd kind of thumbed through it, read a page or two or whatever. I didn't actually realize properly how horrible like volume 2 is. Like it's the game, right? But all along, because I've been watching the anti-Semitism rise on left and right for a long time, and I had actually read with some clarity, like more than once, chapter 11 of the first volume, which is where Hitler lays out the contents of his race ideology. I wanted to know what that was about. Was it like some weird mystical pagan thing? What was it based on? Where did it come from? What did he actually think? Why is he pitting the Aryan versus the Jew? And he's actually very clear in that chapter. So I'd actually read that particular chapter a few times. And for a few years, I had wanted to do a podcast where, I mean, most of my podcasts, not all of them, but probably 80% of them are me reading from primary source material and breaking it down for people, trying to tell them what I see when I read this, which, by the way, usually sometimes it's only my second, usually it's more like my fourth or fifth time reading through whatever I'm presenting by the time I put it on the podcast. So I've had some thoughts about it. I may have made some notes about it. But in this case, I had wanted to do chapter 11 for a very, very long time. I'd wanted to present this, but I just figured that that YouTube wouldn't let me, right? He just read straight from Mein Kampf. It's not particularly nice about Jews. Like, YouTube is going to censor this and it's going to be a problem. And we actually, as we put out this series that I call the Nazi Experiment, we've had some of that problem. So eventually I finally get to this point where I'm dealing with these kind of woke right guys. I mentioned Stephen Wolfe in his book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Well, something that happened a couple of years ago, 22 or 3, I don't remember the exact date, Stephen Wolfe put on Twitter, and I'll paraphrase, but it's very close to his actual words. I could find the screenshot if I thumb through my phone for long enough to read it to you properly. But he says, I am not a conservative to begin with. So that should catch your attention, that the guy who's now claiming to lead the Christian conservative project openly says, I'm not a conservative. But what he says is, I am not a conservative because I accept some of the critical methods of the left, but use them for my own purposes. And that struck me. It's not in chapter 11 of Mein Kampf, it's in chapter 2. And I was like, I'm just going to throw caution to the wind. Actually, I talked about this a whole bunch of times. I put the exact screenshot of Hitler saying almost the same thing in Mein Kampf next to the screenshot of Stephen Wolfe. I presented it in public lectures a few times with the screenshots up as slides. It's like nobody gave a shit. It went nowhere. Nobody realized. I'm like, oh my God, these guys that we're seeing as this weird radical right wing are parroting not the same words. The words are almost irrelevant. The belief structure that led Hitler to be Hitler. And so I was very alarmed by this. So finally, I threw caution to the wind. Sometime, it was still cold out early this year, February, maybe. I'd have to look at the date. And I recorded a podcast where I read most of chapter 2 of Mein Kampf because I thought it was safe enough. It doesn't rail on the Jews that much. And it's where Hitler discovers the problem in his own mind, right? So this is where he was in Vienna and he finally encounters the Jew and he realizes this Jew isn't a German, and he starts reading anti-Semitic pamphlets and he starts kind of getting taken in by them. And then he finally has his realization that the Jew isn't a German and the German isn't a Jew. That means they're very distinct people. So the seeds of his racial beliefs start to take root. But then he has this long discussion, which is what I actually had wanted to present at this point, which is that he's talking about how he engaged with the Marxists at the time in Germany, and he's arguing with the Marxists and he's fighting with the Marxists, and he's super pissed off. And I have to say, as somebody who's fought the woke for a lot of years and tried to expose what they're doing and tried to argue with them for years, it's really relatable, honestly. You're like, holy shit, this is what it's like. You come out and you tell them the facts, and they don't care about the facts, and they just like distort the facts and they twist the facts. And Hitler says you argue with them until your voice goes hoarse, and you go off and you eat lunch and you come back. And then even if you've changed their position, they won't admit it. And if they admit it, by the next morning, they're back to pretending it never happened. And he's just super frustrated and pissed off. And he has this huge rant in this chapter about arguing with Marxists. And then he suddenly realizes, that's when I realized they're all Jews. And the Marxist and the Jew become the same character to Hitler. So he makes what logicians would call a hasty generalization. And so he goes on to believe that this is Jewish logic, not Marxist logic. And he extends and he says, so what I did in response was I studied the methods of the Marxists until I became an expert in them myself. And not only could I argue with them better, but I was able to apply their methods to drive home my own fixed principles. So he had his now fixed principles, which will later be revealed to be his racialist worldview, which is that the German and the Jew are fundamentally different people. And he's going to drive home those fixed convictions using Marxist methods. That's actually what he says. And that's also what Stephen Wolfe said. So I'm like, shit, this movement that I wasn't calling woke right yet at the time. I just knew that it was Christian nationalism plus a bunch of post-liberal guys. That was all. I didn't know what to call them. They called themselves the New Right primarily. So this New Right or dissident right my thought was they're making the same mistakes as Hitler. So then we get forward into, kind of the watershed moment, of course, is right before Tucker's big tour, before the election last year. He has Daryl Cooper on his show. Daryl Cooper does outright David Irving Nazi apology. He says Churchill's the chief villain. He suggests that the Holocaust was really like a final act of mercy by Hitler. And I'm like, all right, enough is enough. I'm going to have to say something about this, right? And so what I decided to do was, let's do two things. For whatever reason, I thought it would be an interesting thought. We always, as Americans, talk about the American experiment, and we're engaged in this living experiment to see if self-governance can produce a prosperous and thriving nation. And it's a republic if we can keep it, and we can say all of the things and feel all patriotic and feel a part of that experiment. I was like, well, what if we take a step back and frame out what the Nazis did? We just admit, okay, they had some points about some problems in Germany post-World War I, how ugly it got for Germany, whether they deserved it or not, it's a separate question. This is how their lived experience and their feelings were. The Weimar experiment was not going very well. The Weimar Republic was corrupt. It was weak. It had some issues. It certainly was not advocating for Germans to get their standing back in Europe following World War I. It was not opposing the Treaty of Versailles. It was doing whatever, keeping all of these kind of limits on military and on economics and everything else. And it was decadent. People were living it up, partying. Things were getting kind of out of control. And I guess it's the Roaring 20s, where the Roaring 20s kind of everywhere developed, I should say. But at any rate, they said, okay, we got problems. Let's do an experiment to solve the problems. That experiment was called the National Socialist Workers' Party, German Workers' Party. And so let's call it the Nazi experiment and see what the results of that experiment were. We know the results of the experiment were World War II, and then the Holocaust, and then the absolute reorganization of the entire world project based on, holy shit, we can't have another war like this because we're all going to kill each other. So we have this complete rethinking of empire and war and all of this as a result of how catastrophic the Nazi experiment was. And then I was like, if we're going to call it the Nazi experiment, why don't I just do, which I had done for that Chapter 2 podcast, why don't we just lay out the contents? What was the experiment based on? What was it? So I come up with this podcast series idea called the Nazi Experiment series. And it's in 10 volumes now, not counting that first one. I've already got plans for like 3 more still, so I have no idea how long this is going to go. But I decided to start in volume 2. And what had happened was I had actually sat down to start reading it, to start planning for this. And I was like, I'll read volume 2 first, and then we'll figure, because I was still scared to publish chapter 11. I didn't think that that's not possible. That's always been in the back of my head, but I'm like, I don't think they're going to let me. So I read chapter 1 of the second volume, and I thought, and then I read, which he lays out his idea of the racial worldview. And then I read chapter 2, which is really long. And I'm like, jaw on the floor the whole time, like, holy shit, this is it. Like, this, people have got to hear this. I don't know how. It's like, I've got to prepare this. So I sit down a week or two later, I come back to the book, and I'm like, I've read, down to about chapter 8 at that point. And I come back and I start reading chapter 2 to plan the podcast. And he's like talking about our racial worldview or Weltanschauung or whatever. And I'm like, I don't remember what that is. I better reread chapter 1 to get my grounding again. And when I reread chapter 1 the next time, I'm like, oh my God, I get this now. Oh no. So that becomes the first volume. Then chapter 11 explains the worldview. So then we do our chapter 11 podcast, and then it's just been this thing. But the goal has been to expose that the propaganda that two things, maybe three, I don't know. But one is to expose that the propaganda that we're hearing about World War II and the Nazis is propaganda. It does not match what Hitler actually said, what Hitler consistently said from 1918, 1919, forward through the 20s when he wrote Mein Kampf, forward to 1939 when he's giving the speech at the Reichstag in Germany, and before he launches the war, to 1942, 3, 4 when he's like kind of giving speeches and still believes all this crap. It's a consistent picture of how he thinks about the world. And I'm like, all right, we're just going to lay out that the propaganda that we're hearing is fake. The second thing is that I didn't realize till I put that first episode out, there were so many parallels to what I see from the radical right, the new right. And I put this podcast out, and a friend of mine texts me, kind of a regular listener texts me, and he's like, dude, I just listened to your Nazi podcast, and my jaw was on my desk the entire time. And I said, why? And he said, because, well, what he said next shook me. I think about it like literally every time I'm like, I'm not going to do this shit anymore. I think about this. He's like, because once I listened to that, I realized that I have been reading Mein Kampf on X for the last 6 months without knowing that's what I was reading. And that was the second point, is I wanted people to realize that this stuff that we're hearing is not new. Especially I wanted young people to realize they're not edgy new trailblazers. They're pulling up the worst recycled garbage from moments in history, whether it's the Russian czars, whether it's the Bolsheviks, whether it's the communists, whether it's the Nazis, whether it's the Islamists in the 1950s working under the Soviets and the PLO or whatever, or PFLP. Like, this is just recycled trash that you guys are thinking is new and edgy and cool, because nobody told you that this is coming out of the worst annals of history. And it's literally, all they did was take the citation off. Like, R.N. McIntyre from The Blaze, not his real name, comes out with Paperwork Americans, this essay, this podcast. He puts out this whole thing about we've got to fight against the paperwork Americans who are not Americans by heritage, but simply by paperwork. And it's like, if you've read chapter 3 of Mein Kampf in the second volume, you recognize, shit, that's what Hitler said. Like, he just repackaged. I don't know if he knows, but I guarantee you somebody up the chain somewhere knows that that's exactly the argument Hitler made. And let's get that flowing in the right wing in America through some conduit who maybe knows and maybe doesn't know, doesn't matter. Here's some talking points. Here's something to read. Dude, check this out. Next thing you know, he's writing an article, making a show. Here's a talking point. Run with it because you're a good podcaster. Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't. I have no idea. But the point is, it's like, I know where that comes from, and I can show people where it came from, and I can make it unambiguous that this is where it came from. And that's what I want. That was the second goal, was to unmask that this isn't new. This is recycled garbage. And the third one is, of course, is the point of the name of the podcast series, the Nazi experiment. Okay, that's an experiment. They did. It failed. It was real bad. We have problems. What if we do a similar experiment? What's going to happen? Well, you can make some predictions. When you dump these two chemicals together, the same thing happens every single time. And when you dump these political situations together, you can probably guess that similar things are going to happen. So,
an interesting point about that, I saw a tweet this morning, and it was an Islamist that was claiming that jihad just means struggle. And the person responded and said, did anybody tell you what Mein Kampf means?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or what is the key word of literally the entire communist project also is that they have the intrinsic struggle. That's actually another way you could define woke, is that you think that the entire point of your life is this intrinsic, all-defining struggle against some corrupt political power that's preventing us from having a utopia.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that, by the way, last night, it's not out yet, obviously, but last night I recorded a podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with this book.
I am.
Yeah,
I've
so
read it.
I'm starting to do a little bit of a series on this. So speaking of Islamism, this book for your audience that might not know, by Saeed Qutb, it's called Milestones. It is a Leninist rendition of how to install. It's the Muslim Brotherhood basically guidebook. It is a Leninist derived project for a radical Islam political campaign to take over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Saeed Qutb was a kind of huge fan of Lenin. That's not a secret. And there are convincing arguments that I think are quite apparent once you're familiar with them, that what he did was took Lenin's 1902 book, What Is to Be Done, and said, well, I'll put the milestones along the road of what is to be done, and wrote this book. So I'm trying to present this book now to people to show, but it's the same thought architecture. It's the same mental architecture the Nazis had, and the whole thing. He's got an entire chapter about jihad, about struggle, and it's the same as Mein Kampf, and it's the same as the communist struggle to overthrow the bourgeoisie. It's all the same identical concept.
And they set it in place throughout the world too. If you look at what happened in Rhodesia and South Africa, if you look what happened with the PLO, if you look what happened with the various communist groups around Europe, they did the same thing. They came up with a struggle that they believed could resonate with people about oppression, and they tied a specific group to it so that they can put out their ideas and put out their revolutionary thought process without having to just say, "Hey, we're the USSR and we're trying to take over capitalism," because they knew that didn't resonate so well with
That's
Western
right.
audiences. So instead, they found groups around the world that they could resonate with. I'm sure you know this too. They did an experiment. They made a movie about it too. It was called The Wave, where a school teacher did the same thing. It was actually a real study where they took the more disaffected kids in class and taught them about discipline and pride and all of this, and formed this like kind of like SS unit in the school, which basically took over the school. It became like the most popular movement and all of this, and they started beating the shit out of people who dissented and all of that. And then he said that when the teacher got fired for this, he said, well, this is not just in our school, this is a worldwide movement, and the leader of the movement is coming to address you guys on Saturday night. He'll be here, whatever. And when they all showed up to meet the leader was Hitler. Like they pulled the curtain back and they showed Hitler and said, this is how the Holocaust happened. Like, you thought you were doing something good by forming into these groups, and didn't realize that you got swallowed by a cult, and that cult became violent without you even knowing it. Like,
yeah, that's right. And that's part of the impetus that led me to do this podcast series also. Is one of the first things somebody suggested to me that I read a book called Account Rendered by Melita Moshman. So I did. And just a quick summary of that. By the way, here's a tip for all the people out in the world that don't know what to do. If you're reading, you're learning. If you're not reading, you usually don't know what to say. So you start reading, and it rabbit trails you into places. I recommend reading primary sources, not weird blogs that look like they're built on GeoCities. But at any rate, I read this book, Melita Moshman. The story with her is that she's a young German girl, 15 years old in 1933. So you can figure out when she was born if you're a mathematician or something. And so she's grown up in this. She's born in the year World War I ends. She grows up in the interwar period. She's 15 years old in 1933 when Hitler takes power, and she gets swept up in the current of all the young people. And in 1933, they were called March Violets because they joined. There was a huge join up in March of 1933 to the Hitler Youth. And so she, being a girl, joined what's it called, the BDM, the Bader Deutsche Model, which is the girls' division of the Hitler Jugend. So she joins that, and the book is basically her best friend at the time when she joins the Hitler Youth is a Jewish girl that lives down the street. Obviously, that goes kind of sideways. But she talks about why she got swept up in the beginning. Then in the middle, it's all talking about the stuff that she did, like basically going and helping soldiers take over houses as they invaded Poland. not fully grasping how wrong it was, but kind of having a sense of it. And then at the end, she kind of explains how she comes out of National Socialism 12 years later after the war ends. So she becomes a National Socialist in 33. Everything falls apart 12 years later in 45. And it's 12 years after that in 57 that she finally breaks from National Socialism. And I think the middle part is vaguely interesting. I think the first and the last part of that book are fascinating. And I did a couple of podcasts about it, where one of them, I just go through part of that first part of the book. I don't remember if it's the first chapter, but she's talking about what swept her up was the love of Germany. She thought she was doing the right thing. She believed in socialism. She had conservative parents in a good household who, were, professional and not wealthy, but well enough off. And she thought it was just kind of fun to rebel against them and get taken up in this socialist movement that her parents didn't really recognize or appreciate. But they were going to help the German worker. They were going to bring Germany back to glory. It was love of country overwhelmingly, and a little rebellion against parents and the niceties that their parents' generation held that sweep her into this. And so I do this podcast talking about the temptation that the woke right is offering, particularly to young American men. I eventually later do a podcast talking about her story about how she comes out of this at the end, which is that she has these encounters in series with 3 Christian and then 1 Jewish person, all of whom have kind of that Christian ethic, which is that they don't forgive you for what you did. They don't deny what you were a part of, but they also don't really judge you for it. There's that recognition, but, the promise of forgiveness and acceptance vibe that's sort of very unique to Christianity and Judaism kind of in the world. And it's finally this Jewish woman who holds her in her gaze, after these 3 profound experiences, some of them long running with Christians. She gets held kind of in the gaze of this Jewish woman who just in her eyes, with almost no words exchanged, doesn't judge her, but also like the message of kind of I understand or I forgive you gets transmitted. So she decides to write this book, not as an apology, not to beg forgiveness, but as the account to tell her childhood friend, who it's not known if her friend ever got the book or not, but she writes this book to tell basically, why did I become a Nazi even though we were friends? And what did we do? What was it about? Why was I swept up in it? And I just think it was super important for people. So I started to recognize these signs, especially, middle of last year, early last year, that there was going to be, I've been saying it on Twitter. You can go check if you type in words like Nazi turn or something like that. You can find out that I've been saying for years that the woke movement would have a sudden shift from communism to Nazism sometime. I had no idea how it was going to happen. And I started watching the pieces fall into place last spring and summer and into the fall. And then by the time Tucker does his thing with Daryl Cooper, I'm like, oh no, yeah. I know where this goes. And so by winter, I'm getting put through it. I'm getting attacked by Nazi stuff online like I've never seen. Turns out I find out that a bunch of it was actually Russian troll farms pushing Nazi propaganda under the guise of American accounts. Something like 30 to 40% of it. I think 40% of it was the number I was actually told by an investigative team that did some scraping and found out. And on we go. And I'm like, something's got to be said. So I start recording podcasts about this in pretty much January, pretty vigorously. And I've just chased it ever since, because I think it's so important for people to hear. It's like, look, you can hear what the Nazis were about for yourself. I know you're not going to read, so I'll read it to you. And so that's my whole logic.
There's a guy I'm having on Monday at noon named Alex Eisenberg, American Jew. He lives in Germany. He's a historian. You should. I'll set up a group chat with you on Twitter afterwards. Sure. He has so much knowledge about the rise of Hitler in Nazi Germany, and I mean solid evidence-based knowledge that he can blow your mind. He comes into my Twitter spaces, and it's like when we did the Nazi experiment. Everyone just shuts up and just listens to this guy because he's such an authority on these things.
Yeah, this is why it's such a damn tragedy that we're not educating our students very well. And it's not that they're not educated. Like, I get that, but like, I didn't pay attention in school either. But the fact of the matter is, I learned to read. And like your whole game, like these people are not functionally literate in a lot of cases, and your whole game changes when you can read for yourself, and that you have the capacity and willingness to read. Like I'm reading this book right now called the Third Reich Source Book. It's 960 pages long. Who wants to read that? It's super long. But if you want to understand the Nazis, it turns out there's pretty much one road to this. Although it's great that you have this historian or people like me making podcasts that are filling in the gap. The fact of the matter is, like, the real goal is to get you interested to go read it for yourself and understand for yourself. But I mean, just as a tiny taste of what I'm talking about, I put a podcast, one of the Nazi experiment podcasts has this. This is a letter from Adolf Hitler to Adolf Gemlich that he wrote in 1919, actually, September 1919. And here's the first sentence, right? So this is way at the beginning. What are Hitler's intentions? If the danger posed by Jewry for our folk today finds expression in the undeniable aversion among broad sectors of our population, the cause of this aversion is not to be sought for the most part in a clear recognition of the consciously or unconsciously systematic and pernicious effect of the Jews as a whole upon our nation. Rather, it largely arises from personal contact, from the personal impression left by the individual Jew, almost always an unfavorable one. Then he goes on to say that the only solution for Europe is to get rid of all the Jews. And that's 1919. It's like it becomes, when you have the capacity to go sit down and read this stuff for yourself, it becomes impossible to maintain these delusions that people like David Irving and his little acolyte, Daryl Cooper, who just admitted yesterday, by the way, on X, that he favors a kind of, he didn't say the words National Socialism. He described socialism and said that it should be for the nation, and that's what he favors. Yep. And it's like, okay, we get you. All your little coy games around this didn't fool anybody, or I guess it fooled some people. It didn't fool a lot of people, though. And it's bullshit. Just go read anything by these people. Like, are you saying the letter from Hitler was a Jewish plant? Is that what your argument's going to be against it? It's like he's saying from the beginning, the National Socialist German Workers' Party didn't even exist when he wrote that letter. It didn't exist yet. It was just the German Workers' Party, and Hitler had just joined it, and there were exactly 7 members. It was like the smallest little dork convention you could imagine, and Hitler was number 7. And so it's like, this was there from the very inception of the concept. This was the reason for creating this, was to create a socialist program for Germany to restore its national glory. And the way they were going to do it was from a racialist view that believed that the Jews were the successful minority that needed to be scapegoated as a power gaining device in order to allegedly solve the problem. So seize the means of racial production, which he borrowed straight from the Marxists, just like he said in Mein Kampf, which you can read for yourself too.
Mm-hmm. There's a researcher I follow on Twitter also. I'll give her a plug. Her name's Angel of Depth, at 9mm 24/7. Mm-hmm. I'm lucky. I'm an observant Jew. You were saying if you're not reading, you're not learning. So I have the Sabbath every week. So I'm constantly looking for books, and it seems like whenever I have like an idea that I want to look into or something that we talk about, she always has a book to recommend for me. And it's like she's just such a wealth of information. If you're not following her, you definitely should. James, I got to run, but man, this has been a lot of fun. And
yeah, man.
I would love to. I can't wait to hear your new podcast on the Nazi experiment when you could do it, and I'll set up that group chat with you and Alex. You should definitely talk to him. He's a true historian's historian. You know?
Well, I'll tell you, with this Nazi experiment series, the next one coming out, you guys are going to like, because remember what I said was the thing that made me decide I got to do this podcast series was that chapter 2 of the 2nd volume. So the next one coming out, which I hope will come out Friday, it might come out Monday, so it's going to be real soon. I've already recorded it, is the first third of that chapter, which is it's an eye-opener, buddy. And so, like, look forward to that. It's coming right around the corner.
I can't wait.
It will be volume 10. So, I mean, we're getting somewhere with the series.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming, man. I can't wait to hear. We're going to do another space on it, me and Noam, when as soon as it comes out.
Sounds awesome.
We love promoting your stuff, man. We really do.
Oh, thank you.
So again, please follow James. He's at newdiscourse.com, and you can find him on YouTube. You can find him in podcasts. His stuff is absolutely worth listening to. Thursday, I'm off tomorrow. We have Tommy Kerrigan coming on. We're going to be talking about finding God and becoming an influencer. Monday, we have Alex Eisenberg on. Thursday next week, we have Tom Luongo. It's going to be... Oh, Ian Burlingham says hi, by the way. He just wrote me. He said, please tell James I said hi. So, another friend. I really like doing podcasts with him. But, guys, you can find me at halseyenglish.live. And thank you very much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
My fellow Americans, tonight I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
In all honesty, a border wall or steel slats won't work. But great bodies of water will separate us from the horrible Mexican rapists. Introducing the 2019 Trump Great Border Moat. Stocked with the most aggressive penis fish, incredible man-eating alligators, and unbelievable genetically modified moose-cocked rape dolphins, as well as flying, migrant-eating sharkfish. So incredible.
I swore to protect our country, and that is what I will always do.